Afternoon. We are excited to host our first WERA Hot Topics webinar focused on student perceptions to improve instruction. Thank you for joining us. And Holly, if you want to make sure to click the record button.
It's recording.
Awesome. That's like the one thing that I never, ever remember. So thank you very much. So we are going to do quick introductions. We've got 1 hour that we're committed to doing this webinar in and leaving some time for questions. So let's get started. First, some introductions. We have three great and fabulous people who have been working on this project around student perceptions. And so we're all going to share a little piece of this presentation as we go forward. I do want you to know we only have an hour carved out for this, so I'm sure that there will be lots of questions and maybe additional follow-up that you may want to have after the webinar to find out more, and we will make sure that you receive the recording and any links that are in this presentation, as well as the PowerPoint presentation for you to continue learning about the work that we've been doing in Washington State around student perception surveys. Sue, I'm going to let you start with an introduction of yourself.
Sure. My name is Sue Anderson. I direct the Educator Effectiveness Office at OSPI, and that's overseeing TPEP, our Teacher and Principal Evaluation Program, as well as the BEST program for beginning educators.
Pete.
And I'm Pete Bilesma. I'm the Director of Assessment and Program Evaluation in the Mukilteo School District. Previously worked in a number of places, including OSPI, and I've got more than 30 years of experience doing survey development and program evaluation.
Holly.
I'm Holly Hansen, and I'm with Center for Strengthening the Teaching Profession, or CSTEP, because it's so long, and I am the Director of Teacher Engagement and Initiatives.
And I'm Nasue Nishida, Executive Director for CSTEP and also a WERA board member who is kind of coordinating this Hot Topics webinar for WERA members. So would love to hear your feedback about this structure as a way of getting bits of information out about hot topics happening in our state or in education in general. A couple of things for those attendees. We're in webinar mode, which means you are basically muted and are not visible to us. You will only see us as panelists. But we want to orient you to a Q&A panel somewhere on your screen where you are welcome to, and we invite any questions you may have. We'll have time at the end to address those questions, and Holly will be monitoring the Q&A. So please write any questions or any other comments or reflections as we go through this webinar. All right. So really quickly, in this short amount of time we have with you, we're going to do a quick overview of a 2-year project we had working focused on student perceptions with 8 districts. So we're going to talk about that a bit. We want to talk about the process we underwent to develop the student perception items that are now available for any educator in Washington State. We're going to show you how you can access, or how your people can access those student perception items, which are housed in eVal, which is the basically the state's evaluation management system, and we'll kind of show you a rundown of that. It'll be very quick and fast, and we'll make sure to follow up with some links about that. And then questions at the end. All right, a little overview. So about 3 years ago, we started a project which was funded by OSPI via Gates Foundation money to explore the world of student perception data, very much focused on student perceptions of teaching and learning, student perceptions of instruction. So this was very focused. It was not about student perceptions of building culture and climate. It was really looking at students' perceptions in the classroom with their teacher and how they felt they received information, how they felt they best could learn and grow as students in that classroom. So we, with 8 other districts, and you can see them listed here, really focused on this exploration. And over the 2 years, we brought the group together to learn about student perception with the Technical Assistance Committee that helped us along the way. And we worked a lot with other survey vendors across the nation who have been doing student perception surveys in some way, shape, or form, probably over the last decade, really getting things launched in that way. So there was a lot of exploration. After the 2 years, we had a lot of learning, which we want to talk about with you. And then over the last year, we've really been in development mode to be able to have those survey items ready to go and launched for educators in our state. So that's a quick and dirty of what the project was about and who all was involved district-wise. One of the reasons why we got into this work was for why we got into this project in the first place was for really the four main bullets on your screen. We really wanted to look at students' perceptions so that they would help educators, specifically teachers, think about their practice and their growth and how students think. We also wanted to look at student perceptions in a more valid, reliable, and systematic way. We know that teachers often do student perception eliciting in some way. It might be exit slips, it might be informal surveys of their classroom. We really wanted to look at some structured and systematic ways to collect data that would provide some meaningful information to teachers about their practice. And then lastly, we were looking at 2 areas specifically in the evaluation law that also were privy to gathering student perception data. One was on the multiple measures that we use to look at student growth, and the other one was a reference around student input particularly. So you can see the RCWs cited below. Those were the 2 areas we were hoping to make some other connections for educators in our state specific to the evaluation law. Sue, do you want to talk about a little bit about what we learned through the project?
Sure. So one of the things that we had assumed at the beginning of the project was that having a firewall between the student perception survey results and the evaluation process would be an important component. But one of the districts involved in the pilot wondered whether these survey results would be open to public records requests. And much like everything that a teacher does, yes, they would be open to a public records request. And what we learned was, after consulting with attorneys from WEA, from our agency, and also HR attorneys, was that the closer this data is actually connected to evaluation, the more private it will be. And so, some teachers care about that, some teachers don't. We have it housed in our evaluation system evaluation management system, but we talked about how principals asking teachers if they've administered a student perception survey, and the teacher saying yes, and the principal asking, well, what are some things you learned, is really connects it to the teacher's working file for their evaluation for that year, and would lead to some increased privacy for that data. Some teachers are happy to just share the raw data with their principals. The way the data is being kept in eval, it's up to the teacher to decide whether or not the information will be shared. So so that was one of the initial learnings that was surprising to us, but it was an important learning. We also feel that making those student surveys connected to the instructional framework that a district is using is important. First of all, it ensures that the language of the questions is aligned to the way that that district and the schools and the educators in that district talk about learning and teaching, and the kinds of language that they use with their students. And then the other thing is that the more tightly connected it is to the instructional framework, questions can be used then to track back to teacher practice. So if I'm using a question that relates to, say, for example, Danielson Component 3B, And I'm finding that a lot of students are not feeling that they have opportunities to hold, high quality discussions and participate in that. That can help me track back to component 3B and look at my practice in the framework. So it makes it a lot easier to do that. We also learned, and this I think is quite, goes without saying, but flexibility in giving teachers the opportunity to choose survey questions is important. If teachers are forced to ask questions that are uncomfortable for them, they're unlikely to use the survey. So the more control we can give them over the kinds of things that they're interested in learning about their practice and ready to learn about their practice, the better off we'll be. We heard a lot from teachers in primary grades that they would like to be able to afford these same opportunities to their students, and they would like to have those opportunities to learn about their instruction. I consider that part B of this project. So there are some student surveys out there that work for primary grades. We didn't have the time or funding to fully develop those, but we hope to figure that out in the future. And the other thing we learned, of course, is that student surveys that come from vendors can be pretty expensive. So those were, I would say, the key learnings from our project.
So where we went from here is we took all this learning and we decided with OSPI's blessing to continue the work forward to actually creating student perception items for the state of Washington for educators here. And going back to Sue's last bullet about how the cost of using vendor products, it was quite a costly endeavor to have districts take on that additional cost if they were interested in that work. So we decided, and the state really helped promote the fact that we could move forward in developing a set of items that any K-12, actually 412 is probably the better. We don't have a primary grade survey yet. Something that would be accessible to everyone. So Pete is going to talk a little bit about the development process that we underwent in this last year after the 2-year exploration with 8 districts. We contracted with Pete as well as Karen Banks as 2 survey experts that would really guide our work and learning around creating items, survey items, and using their expertise to help us focus in over the last year. We convened 3 educator work groups that were expert groups in each of the 3 instructional frameworks, and they helped develop and select items that ultimately have been used in the bank. You'll see, and Pete will talk more about how we pre-tested and piloted items through the last year of that work. Pete, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Okay. So we started the process by first looking at the frameworks themselves to see what parts of the frameworks actually students would have the ability to give ratings. Clearly, they don't understand what teachers' professional development is like, or maybe some of their goal setting. So we actually had to narrow down the frameworks to the items and the constructs that students would be able to provide good feedback on. Then we collected all the surveys that we had been working with over the last few years, and took each item and looked at it to see if it was aligned with one of the frameworks or subcomponents. These surveys came from states like Maine and Massachusetts. Panorama had some surveys that were in the public domain. There are a number of other survey products that were out there that we looked at. And the sense was there wasn't any one thing that would fit perfectly in all 3 of our frameworks. So we decided to take this on. And so we looked at each one of the items and kind of coded them to, if this is an item that was maybe not perfect, but it was close to a particular subcomponent of a framework, we coded that. We posted those all over the board or all over the walls. And then we figured out, okay, of the frameworks that we want to look at, the constructs, where are we short? So we had to figure out we need more items. So we created new items, we wrote items, we looked at the ones that had already existed, Some of them were really good as is. Others were not so good. They were long. They were maybe wordy or have jargon in them. So we did some clarifying and simplifying of that, keeping in mind that we wanted these to be able to be read easily by students who weren't necessarily English speakers. We put all those together, and we had 359 items, some of which overlapped each other. The cell had 111. Danielson had 91 items aligned with what we thought we could do in terms of the concepts in that framework. And then Marzano had the most. We also had to figure out how exactly we'd want to structure the survey. So some of the survey items were posed as questions. Some of them were as statements. Some of the rating scales, they were all over the place. They varied a lot. So what we decided was we would stick with statements and then a 5-point Likert scale that that would be consistent across the entire survey, and that would just lessen the cognitive load of a student going through the survey. Then we drafted a pretest for each of the frameworks and had small groups, usually as one-on-one or two-on-one, where in these cognitive labs, students would take the survey and we would be there watching, and then we would ask them to talk out loud. So as they're reading it through, they might say, oh yeah, that's easy, or I don't understand what this word is. And so we're taking notes as they're going along. And after they're all done, we're timing it and we're noticing what items might take longer to complete than others. And then after that was all done, we went back and kind of debriefed with each of the students to see where they might have misunderstood a concept or misunderstood a word. They made some comments about, well, this sounds a lot like another item we had, and there was some redundancy. So after that process, and we did that with a wide range of students, low income, well-off kids, male, female, lots of different grades, English language learners, some kids who were in special ed. So we got a nice cross range of students giving us feedback on these items. And based on that, we got rid of a lot of items. We shortened it up. We adjusted a few. And then we put together a survey that could then be rolled out to a larger scale. Here's an example of one of the survey items. I know what high quality work looks like. This kind of is getting at the idea of a rubric, but a lot of kids didn't know what a rubric was. This item is shown in both the Cell 5D P5 and the Danielson 3D surveys. So, and Marzano has a similar item to this in its survey. And the scale ranges from strongly disagree to a strongly agree. So these are the number of items in each of the frameworks. So for Danielson, there were 67 items, and that might sound like a lot, but even when we had the full range during the cognitive labs with those small groups, the students were finishing in 10 to 15 minutes. And so there's a lot less here. So we're pretty confident that these surveys would be able to be taken by a student in about 10 minutes. And that includes even kids who don't even speak English all that well. So Danielson's got a couple domains, but 5 subdomains in each, 34 items overall. But you can see 10 items in 2A, 6 and a bunch of others. We're shooting to get at least 3 or 4 items in each of these subdomains. And for the most part, except for Marzano, we hit that target. In Cell, there were 73 items in 5 different domains. And on the next slide, Marzano's, you got 82 items. This is the longest survey. But again, that's if you were to take them all at once. And this graphic shows how many items show up for each of the components. And that's it.
Thanks, Pete. So we want to give you a little sampling. If you are someone who has access to eval, or if your district isn't using eval but you have an account which you can get, you would be able to go in and see these items, but we just want to give you a smattering. So some examples of items from Cell, I'm not going to read through these, but you get an idea based off what Pete just mentioned. where some of these items fell out in terms of the construct or the dimension or the domain of the framework. So this is cell. Here's some a sampling of survey items from Danielson. And these are some survey item examples from Marzano. And Holly, will you talk a little bit about our pilot numbers?
Sure. So we sent out a large blast and invited people to volunteer to be a part of the pilot. As you can see, Cell Secondary kind of knocked it out of the park with over 1,000 students responding. We just encouraged as many people to take it as possible. Students took the surveys, and then we asked teachers to respond in a separate survey with their responses. Were there things that confused the kids, the students? What was some of the feedback they were getting? How long did it take? That sort of thing. So we got a sense of how they felt about the surveys and got a little bit of feedback from them. We did give them a script to read in the beginning to introduce the survey so that it was consistent across the board. And that was the same for all the frameworks. So as you can see, there was a good number of elementary as well. After we received the feedback from the teachers, we sent the survey results to the teachers and gave them a brief outline of how they might reflect on their results. And those went to them in a variety of forms that they could choose. So many of the teachers that we heard from did have conversations with their students about what about the results and what they heard. And we heard back from many teachers of this was one of the most powerful experiences I've had with my kids. This has prompted me to have different conversations in my PLCs. I was telling Naswe that I have a teacher that has already contacted me several times saying, when is the new survey out? Our PLC, we need to do this now, because they want to do it several times during the year to collect that data. So.
And I would echo everything Holly said. I think the biggest thing we wanted teachers to realize in all of this is that the data is important, but it's really about the conversation, the action, the thing you're going to do next that is more important than the data. The data helps elevate something you want to work on or something you had no idea and you need to kind of hone in. But the data just for data is not as important as the, so now what do I do next? And that seemed to be, in some cases, a real revelation for teachers, especially those who feel like they get pretty good reviews from their evaluator. They're doing what they can tell, a pretty strong job in the classroom. But hearing students' feedback on particular things may, in very specific areas of practice, have perhaps elevated an area they really want to focus in on. So that was really the gist of the feedback.
Yeah.
We want to show you, and I'm going to attempt to do this. We want to show you a small video. It's actually 6 minutes. Don't worry, folks. We're not going to show the entire 6 minutes. A video that we did in the project that talks a little bit about the student perception work. So I'm going to attempt to share that with you. Holly, let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes.
Okay.
really matters what our kids think of what's going on in the classroom. We're doing this for them. So we have a lot of measures to determine whether we think they're learning or not. We don't have a great way of knowing how they're learning and how they feel about that learning. So this is another piece of that larger puzzle. There's just a whole slew of aspects that we don't have a great way to assess without a tool like this.
It's very enlightening to learn about my strengths and weaknesses and how those vary from what I expected. But it definitely helped me shift some of my focus, both instructional practice, but also my relationships with my students, how I spoke with them, how I interacted with them, and just being a little more cognizant of how I am perceived by them and how I can change some of those perceptions that were surprising to me through some of my practices.
She cares about what we think because she's a good teacher and she wants to know how we feel and how she can help us. Edit the class and the way we learn so it's more interactive and the students, and it's more fun to teach and to learn.
If you ask kids, they're gonna give you the real story in a very candid way about what's going on in the classroom. And so having that feedback is great, and then using that to then inform what areas you want to grow as an instructor.
Okay, that's just a little preview, folks. We'll send the link if you want to see more of that video with more educators from the project and more student voices as well. All right, can you see my screen again?
It's still on the website. There we go. You're back to the responses.
Okay. So how do you get into these? How do you find the student perception items we've been talking about? How do you message to folks you know about this opportunity? And we're going to do a quick overview of the ways folks can get into that. All of the bank of survey items categorized by instructional framework have been loaded into eval, which is the state's evaluation management system. And again, you do not have to use eval as your district's evaluation system in order to get access. You can go right to the person who does all of your manages all of your district's EDS work, and you can get an account created through that will give you access into the eval that will give you access to the survey items. So I'm going to do another screen change, and I don't mean to shift you everywhere, but we want to show you what this looks like online. Do you see that, Holly?
Yes.
Okay.
We're there.
Awesome. Okay, so this is eval. This is a general eval help site, part of their site that you don't actually need an account to get into. And I don't have an eval account, so there. I'm not sure how all we get into this, but there is a teacher guide that gives links and instructions for creating a survey, opening the survey, which, by the way, we should have mentioned is an online survey link. Mm-hmm. So students access these by typically it will get sent to their email address, their school email address, and students would access them by a computer, some device, or even their phone. They could do that. And then it will also show what students see after teachers have developed their survey, and then the results that a teacher will see. So we're going to go right into creating surveys. This is really the how-to of how a teacher would go in to develop, and it gives nice little smiley faces, 1, 2, 3 steps on how to do that. The teacher is going to create a title, choose the instructional framework their district uses, and then they can go into specific constructs, domains, dimensions that they want to focus in on. And they actually get to self-select the question items they want to use. So it's not like, as Pete said, it's not like you got a survey of 82 items and that's what you have. This is very much about, maybe there's only 5 questions I really want to know. And I'm going to click the 5 that I want to know and send that out. So again, this is really about teachers being able to have the flexibility to create something that they feel is relevant to their understanding of their practice from their students' perspective. So I'm going to select my items. These are the statements that I've chosen. This gives you the domain or the construct that it falls in. And then I'm going to preview the survey. This is what my students are, this is how I'm going to create it. This is what my students are going to see. This is really what it is right here. Their statements, and again, with a 5-point Likert scale, strongly disagree to strongly agree. It will ask them some demographic information, race, ethnicity, and gender. And then we go next into opening the survey. So how do students have access to this? How do I give them access? This is all available, and essentially it comes out as a link to the student. So a teacher can pre-plug student emails into the system and it sends it out directly, or a teacher could list the URL for students to access directly. And we've highly encouraged teachers to set aside a portion of class time to initiate the survey with a open and closed window. So open it for 15 minutes and then close it. This is not going to be a 90-day open period. You want to get your information fairly quickly and ready to go. So what do students see on their end? This is basically what they see. The teacher is going to be indicated, or the class that they are in is going to be indicated. The statement items that the teacher has selected are going to be listed with the 5-point scale, and it's literally a click-through operation. And then they submit the survey. Thank you for participating. And relatively immediately, the teacher can check results. This is what the teacher would see on their results end. So they're basically going to see a visual of student response, and you can see kind of the visual color coordination around strongly disagree, disagree, neither disagree nor agree, agree, and strongly agree. So a teacher can kind of get a sense for where their class is falling on each of the statements. Nothing is identifiable to the teacher in terms of who the student is that responded. So that's a pretty important thing. And the other thing to note is this survey information is upon the teacher. It's the teacher's privilege to either share that with somebody else, an evaluator, a colleague, with their PLC, with no one at all. This is not shared widely. This is not something that rolls up to the administrative level. This is something that is literally just for the teacher that initiated the survey, and it would be upon the teacher to take that information where they might want to go with it. Sue's point is pretty important in terms of the conversation that a teacher has with an evaluator about this data will help it become in the kind of the closed, open records, being closed to open records request. So we would just encourage teachers to be thinking about that as they do this kind of work. And that's it. That's kind of the short and sweet of it. And we will make sure that you get the links to this information to investigate on your own. Pete, Sue, Holly, do you have anything else to share?
were the numbers that I provided in terms of the number of items, were those pretty much staying the same? Because I think that's what we used during the pilot. Did any of those get removed, or did we keep them?
Right here.
Go to the next.
The
Go down.
the
again.
chart.
One more. So here it shows the number of survey items for each of the domains and subdomains or dimensions. So total of 67. Are there 67 survey items for Danielson and 73 for Cell, or did you cut back on some of those?
No, I believe that's the right number of items.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
It's a nice number of items per subdomain, so that if a teacher likes the wording of one but not another, and actually there are usually different ideas within that subdomain, so there's a lot of variety that's there for teachers to pick.
I guess the other thing that I would add is that we did get feedback from all levels, from third grade all the way up to seniors taking this, and there might have been some language like rubrics and some of that, but that the younger students really responded well, and we heard from the teachers that the students were incredibly honest, and that they set it up that this is to help me. And so I think the more we can get out there, that this is really about a tool for growth. And it's a great example for kids on how we as adults are modeling growth. And we heard that from teachers.
I would also say that I think the reading level probably is fourth grade. We had some fourth and fifth grade kids take it, and even the ELL kids, if they had a question, it was pretty simple, and we would want a student to be able to ask for clarification when needed. But probably we need to have that primary version soon, because K-2, K to even 3, there's really not much there.
Right.
And these are, doing the whole survey would take a long time, but if you've just got a few items, and actually a teacher could probably do it verbally. I mean, I'm just thinking out loud here, but you could have a kid or have some survey items that a teacher could say and then paraphrase if needed, and have kids be able to respond that way.
Kids can use, smiley faces and things too as their responses. They don't need to necessarily understand all the Likert scale titles.
Okay, so I did not envision this, but we are ahead of time.
Never happened.
So I feel like to honor that. We are going to open up for any questions, and again, we're going to do this through the Q&A chat, which hopefully you can see on your screens. We don't see any questions in there right now, but if you have a question or a comment or a reflection or a suggestion, we would love to hear from you about that. Did we answer all of your questions?
Thank goodness.
Nasue, I think you had promised to sing if we didn't come up with anything.
And now people are leaving. Okay. Yeah. I won't do that, folks.
I have a question for those of you who at C-STEP who got the results. Did you do any kind of an analysis to see what the results were going to be in terms of the surveys for the 3 frameworks? I mean, you had over 1,000 responses. Did you learn anything from that? Or did you just say, well, I don't know what What did you do with that?
We didn't go any deeper in our analysis more than sending results back to teachers and giving them a protocol they could use to kind of review the results. There were several teachers who piloted that did it across classrooms. So we imagine that they did some looking across classrooms to see what differences their classes might have had in response, but we didn't. Really wanted teachers to try this out, and so we didn't feel at this point like we could look too deeply into what their results were. We really just wanted them to try this out.
I'm wondering so I'm asking questions now.
Yes, you are.
At the end of the survey, some demographic information, gender, race. Is there a way to look at the results by gender so that you have a set for boys or a set for girls? Is that functionality in the tool right now on eval?
We did not add that functionality into eval. So right now you just see how many boys, how many girls, and by race, you can see how many students took your survey, but you don't see the breakdown by question or by item. And part of that, I think that functionality could be added at some point if we want to do that. In some cases, if we break down by gender or race, we could get into a situation where those kids do start to become identifiable to a teacher. So I think we would just want to look into that down the road if we decide to do that. And I know that there are lots of other demographic information we might want to add and build in later, and that's certainly a possibility. I think we just wanted to launch and get people trying this out in a pretty low pressure, let's see what we learn kind of way, so that we kind of set it up pretty minimally in terms of what we ask.
Okay.
No questions, folks. Wow. Okay. So we're going to let you go early. This never happens, right? We will follow up with a recording of this webinar for your entertainment and sharing. We'll share any links, and we will share the PowerPoint presentation, and also want to let you know you are welcome to contact any of us about this work. And please extend this opportunity out to your folks, and if they have questions, please send them our way. We'll be doing a more general webinar next week in the evening for teachers who obviously can't necessarily be on a webinar during the day. That is October 16th at 7 p.m. So if there's anybody in your world that might be interested in an evening opportunity to listen in, it's going to basically be the same thing. But I hate to say it, guys, you are a test case that's going to get better the second webinar round.
Or longer.
and probably longer.
Yeah.
So we would just let you know that that's another opportunity if people want to chime in. Thank you for joining.
I see a question.
It says, good work.
Oh, okay.
So thank you.
Very nice. Okay.
That's very nice.
I'm so excited. And a great comment is just as good as a question.
We need that feedback too. Thank you. All right, folks. Thank you so much. Have a good rest of your day.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.